The radio had been going quiet for almost 20 minutes. Not the usual static between transmissions. A different kind of quiet. The kind that settles over the Dalton Highway when the weather stops being weather and becomes something else entirely. Outside the windshield, the world had disappeared. Not darkened. Not dimmed. Disappeared. The headlights pushed maybe 30 feet into the white before surrendering. Beyond that, there was nothing but wind and snow moving sideways at speeds that made the 80,000-pound rig shudder. The temperature gauge on the dash read minus 42 degrees Fahrenheit. And somewhere out there, ahead or behind, it was impossible to say. A family was stranded in a vehicle that was not built for this. Most people, if they found themselves in that moment, would stop, would sit still, would wait for someone else to handle it. The driver did the opposite. He put the truck in gear and kept moving. That is the story of what happened north of the Arctic Circle on the Dalton Highway. And if you have never driven that road, it probably sounds impossible, because the Dalton does not forgive mistakes. It does not offer second chances. And when a blizzard comes through those mountains, it does not slow down for anyone. If you are watching this on television and you have been following this series, you already know what that road means. Your support genuinely matters to us. If you have not subscribed to the channel yet and you can do that, it helps us keep making these stories. Share this one too, if something about it moves you. These are the stories that deserve to reach more people. Now let's go back to the beginning. The Dalton Highway is 414 miles of gravel, ice, permafrost, and patience, running from the town of Livengood, just north of Fairbanks, all the way to Deadhorse on the shore of the Arctic Ocean. It was built in 1974 as a supply road for the construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, a project that required moving massive amounts of equipment into some of the most remote terrain in North America. The road was never intended for tourists. It was barely intended for people who knew what they were doing. For the truckers who work it, the Dalton is not a road in the way most people think of roads. In the boreal forest south of the Yukon River crossing at mile 56, the trees on either side hold some of the wind. Past the tree line, north of the Brooks Range, there is nothing to hold anything. The tundra stretches in every direction, flat and open, and the wind comes off the Arctic Ocean without interruption. By the time that wind reaches Atigun Pass at roughly mile 241, it has been accelerating across hundreds of miles of open plain, and it arrives with a force that veteran drivers still talk about with a kind of respectful quiet. Atigun Pass sits at approximately 4,800 feet of elevation. It is the highest highway pass in Alaska. It crosses the Brooks Range at a point where the mountains funnel weather in ways that no forecast can fully predict. The road through the pass has gradients steep enough that loaded trucks in winter conditions must manage their descent with deliberate, careful brake work. There are no guardrails on many sections. The drop on either side is not decorative. Avalanches are not an unusual event at Atigun. They are a documented recurring hazard. In 2017, a Carlisle transportation driver named Chuck Williams, who had made the round trip to the North Slope for more than 22 years, was directly struck by an avalanche in the pass. He described the first seconds as being beyond thought, beyond reaction, just pure physical force, and then, after it was over, the work of figuring out what came next. The Alaska Department of Transportation maintains programmable message boards on both approaches, specifically to communicate past conditions, and real-time road updates run through 5111alaska.gov. But messages only help if conditions allow you to respond to them in time. What most people do not know is that the Dalton Highway carries no cell phone coverage along essentially its entire length. Zero. From Livengood to Deadhorse, there are no towers. Drivers communicate by CB radio and, on some rigs, by satellite phone. The last reliable fuel stop heading north is Coldfoot at mile 175. After that, there is a 239-mile gap in services before Deadhorse. If something goes wrong between Coldfoot and the oil fields, there is no tow truck to call, no roadside assistance to summon. There is what you have in the cab, what you know, and what the other drivers on the road are willing to do for you. That is the context. That is the world. The driver in this story had been running the Dalton for more than a decade. He had driven through early October storms when the pass was still technically open, but already glazed with black ice. He had driven through February polar nights when the diesel in his tanks started thickening before he reached his destination. He knew this road the way experienced surgeons know anatomy, not from maps or charts, but from 10,000 hours of direct encounter. He was hauling northbound toward Dead Horse, carrying equipment for the oil fields, when the storm changed character. He noticed it the way experienced drivers notice everything, not through instruments alone, but through the feel of the truck. The wind pressure on the cab shifted. The road surface began showing a different texture. The packed snow that had been providing traction started developing a glaze that told him the temperature was dropping faster than the forecast had suggested, and that precipitation was mixing in at a rate that outpaced his windshield wipers. He reduced his speed. This is not a dramatic moment in the way movies make it dramatic. Reducing speed on the Dalton during deteriorating weather is simply what you do. It is not a decision born of fear. It is a decision born of information. The truck weighed close to 80,000 pounds. At that weight, on that surface, the math of stopping distance is unforgiving. An experienced driver does not wait until conditions force a speed reduction. He reduces ahead of the conditions, which buys time. Time on the Dalton is the only currency that matters. The CB crackled. A southbound driver, someone he recognized by voice from previous runs, gave a condition report from the north. The pass was closing. Not closed yet. Closing. The distinction matters because a closing pass gives committed drivers a narrow window, while drivers who had not yet started the ascent should wait. He was close enough to the base that turning around made no sense. He began the climb. Here is what Atigun Pass is like in a bad storm. The road narrows at certain points to a width that makes meeting oncoming traffic a negotiation rather than a routine occurrence. The surface shifts from hard pack to fresh snow to wind-scoured ice within a few hundred yards. The wind, funneled by the mountains on either side, hits the high-profile surface of a loaded semi with a lateral force that the driver must actively correct for, meaning the steering wheel is never truly straight. And the visibility, which had already been poor on the approach, collapses to near zero in the pass itself during a heavy storm. You are driving by memory, by the painted edge lines where they are visible, and by feel. You are driving the road as it exists in your head as much as the road as it exists in front of you. He made the summit. He began the descent on the north side. That is when he saw it. A shape in the white, off to the right of the road, at an angle that was wrong for a parked vehicle. Too far from the edge, too steep. He slowed further and brought his spotlight onto the area. A passenger vehicle. A small SUV. It had gone off the road at some point during the storm and come to rest against a snowbank at the edge of a grade. It had not gone over the edge, but it was not in a position where the occupants could help themselves. He stopped the truck. This is where most people who are not professional drivers might pause and weigh the decision. It was minus 42 degrees outside. The wind was moving at blizzard speed. He was in the middle of Atigun Pass, on a descent, with a full load, with the storm still intensifying. Getting out of the cab was not a casual act. Exposure at those temperatures, in that wind, without the right layering, can produce frostbite on exposed skin in under 2 minutes. Hypothermia can develop faster than most people expect. The human body, designed for temperate latitudes, is running a severe deficit the moment it steps into that environment. He put on his gear. This was not rushing. This was methodical. The layering protocol for working in extreme cold is something that Arctic region drivers understand from hard experience. Base layer that wicks moisture away from the skin. Insulating mid-layer. Outer shell that blocks wind. Face protection. Goggles, not sunglasses. Gloves rated for Arctic conditions. Boots that had been in the warm cab, not stored in the exterior compartment where the cold would have robbed them of their insulating capacity. He did all of this before he touched the door handle. He called his position and situation on the CB first. This matters. Other northbound drivers now knew there was a stopped vehicle at a specific location on the descent. It is a simple act, a few words on the radio. And it is the kind of habit that separates experienced Dalton drivers from inexperienced ones. The road has no way to call ahead for you. You are your own warning system. When he stepped outside, the wind hit him with a physical force that he later described as being leaned on by something very large and very cold. He moved to the SUV quickly and carefully. Quickly because time outside at that temperature is finite. Carefully because the surface between his truck and the stranded vehicle was iced and uneven, and the consequences of a fall in those conditions are not minor. Inside the SUV were a family, a mother, a father, and 2 children. They had been on the road heading north toward Dead Horse, the kind of trip that people make for work transitions and family relocations at the edge of the world. They had crossed the pass and lost control on the descent in the deteriorating conditions. The vehicle had slid into the snowbank at low speed. No injuries. But the vehicle was not going anywhere without outside help. The temperature inside the SUV was dropping as the heat bled out into the storm. They had no way to communicate with anyone. No cell signal. They had been sitting there for over an hour before the truck's spotlight found them. He made a decision that Arctic region professional drivers sometimes have to make. The truck was the answer. Moving the family across the iced road surface to the cab required the same methodical approach as everything else. The children went first, because children in extreme cold lose heat faster than adults due to their lower body mass. This is not instinct. This is knowledge. A driver who has spent years on Arctic routes understands the physiology of cold exposure at a practical level. The children needed to be in the warm cab first. Inside a modern long-haul sleeper cab, temperature can be maintained even in extreme cold because the bunk heater, running on diesel from the main tank, operates independently of the engine. That cab was warm. Not hotel room warm, but survivable warm, which is exactly what that family needed. Here is what most people who have never been inside a serious long-haul sleeper do not realize. That cab was a functioning living space. There was water. There was food. The kind of high-calorie, easy-to-open food that experienced long-distance drivers carry as a survival measure, not a luxury. There were blankets in the bunk. The bunk heater, which on most modern rigs uses somewhere between 1/4 and half a gallon of diesel per hour to maintain temperature, was fully operational. The family went from a vehicle that was becoming a danger to them into a space that, while cramped and smelling of diesel and long miles, was safe. He radioed ahead and behind. He reported the stranded vehicle, the family, their condition, and his position holding at the base of the north descent. He requested that any southbound commercial driver advise conditions at the summit. He requested the situation be relayed to Alaska State Troopers. This is the CB communication system working the way it was designed to work. Not as a social channel, but as an emergency relay network when official communications are unavailable. The storm did not cooperate. It would be several hours before conditions allowed any further movement. Most people confronted with the idea of spending several hours inside a truck cab during a blizzard at -40 imagine it as a barely endurable experience. For the family, it was something else entirely. It was the difference between a very bad night and a night that could have ended in a way no one wants to think about. For the driver, it was a situation being managed. His preparation had made it manageable. While they waited, something happened that happens often in these situations, but rarely gets told. The driver talked to the family. He explained the road. He explained why the highway has no guardrails in certain sections, and what the road crews do instead. He explained the CB system and the silent network that keeps commercial drivers on the Dalton connected to each other even when everything official goes dark. He explained what he carried and why the list was longer than most people would expect. One of the children, at some point in those hours, asked him if he was scared. He thought about it for a moment. He said that when you know what you are doing and you have prepared the way you are supposed to prepare, the fear changes into something more useful. It becomes attention. It becomes focus. You are not afraid of the storm because you have become a person who prepares for the storm. The storm is not a surprise. The storm is the job. Experienced Arctic truckers carry what the industry informally calls a storm kit, distinct from a standard emergency kit, specifically because they understand that being caught in a storm on the Dalton is not a hypothetical scenario. It is a scheduled possibility. A standard emergency kit is what you hope you never need. A storm kit is what you know you might need before the winter is over. The specifics are worth understanding. In addition to standard survival gear, veteran Dalton drivers commonly carry a portable stove or small heating element capable of boiling water, because hydration in extreme cold is critical, and cold water lowers core body temperature. They carry a hand-operated radio capable of monitoring emergency frequencies. They carry reflective triangles and flares, though flares in blizzard conditions work mostly for proximity warning, not long-distance visibility. They carry a compact folding shovel, because clearing snow from under a truck's differentials can become necessary when a vehicle bogs down. They carry a tire plug kit, because a flat tire on the Dalton in a blizzard, without the safe ability to change to a spare, is its own category of problem. And they carry a heavy-duty tow strap, rated for loads far beyond what the strap will be asked to pull. Because the next driver they encounter on a bad night might be the one who needs it. The storm began to break around 4 in the morning. Not completely, but enough. The wind dropped from sustained blizzard speeds to something that still qualified as severe, but allowed visibility to extend beyond the immediate road surface. A second northbound commercial rig, a flatbed out of Fairbanks, had stopped about a mile south during the worst of it, and now pulled forward to assist with the SUV. The flatbed driver had a tow strap. This is another one of those items that experienced Dalton drivers carry as a matter of course, rather than as an emergency measure. On the Dalton, a heavy-duty recovery strap is standard equipment. It costs relatively little. It weighs relatively little. And in situations like this one, it is the difference between a vehicle staying stuck until a formal recovery unit can reach the location, which on the Dalton can mean days, and a vehicle being back on the road within the hour. The family's SUV was pulled out of the snowbank. It was driven in convoy at reduced speed, with the 2 commercial trucks flanking it in a way that provided some wind protection and maintained visibility. They made it north of the pass. Minor cosmetic damage from the snowbank. Mechanically sound. The family was shaken and exhausted and cold from the time before the driver had found them. But they were not injured, and they were not in danger. Here is what the driver said afterward, in the understated language that people who work hard jobs in dangerous places tend to use. He said he did not think of it as a rescue. He said he thought of it as what you do when you find someone who needs help on the road. He said every driver up there knows that the next time, it could be them. It could be their rig with a mechanical failure on the descent. It could be their truck that goes into a drift because a gust hit at exactly the wrong moment on a blind curve. The community of drivers on the Dalton is small enough, and the road is hard enough that the code is not just a sentiment. It is practical self-interest. You help because help travels in both directions, and because in the absence of the usual infrastructure, the only safety net is each other. There is a real and documented culture of mutual aid among commercial drivers on remote Arctic routes. It does not make the news very often because it is routine to the people who practice it. In 2026, a team of Canadian commercial drivers were formally recognized for pulling a family out of snow and assisting a stranded truck driver in blizzard conditions on a mountain highway, working together when most traffic had stopped. Their account of why they did it was simple. You see someone who needs help, you help them. What makes it extraordinary to people watching from outside is the environment in which that ordinary decency is expressed. That environment is what the rest of the world does not see. Ryan Spartz, a commercial driver in South Dakota, did something similar in a documented blizzard incident. He used heavy equipment to navigate through drifts to reach a rancher who had been stranded in his vehicle for over 27 hours, moving through conditions that had stopped every other form of response. He reached him when no one else could. That is not a special category of human being. That is a person who showed up with the right equipment, the right knowledge, and the willingness to use both. The pattern is consistent across all of these cases. Professional drivers on hard roads in severe conditions are often the first and only point of contact for people in trouble, because those drivers are already out there. They are already moving through the thing that is stopping everyone else, and because they have prepared for the worst, they frequently have the capacity to help when others do not. This is worth dwelling on, because it changes the way you might look at a loaded semi-truck the next time you see one on a highway during a winter storm. The truck is not just cargo. The driver is not just an employee moving goods from one point to another. That rig is a self-contained emergency platform operated by someone trained, by experience, and by necessity, in cold weather survival, vehicle recovery, and the kind of methodical problem-solving that extreme environments demand. The truck carries food, water, tools, communication equipment, and warmth. The driver carries knowledge that took years to build. The driver made Dead Horse on schedule, delayed, but within the tolerances that the FMCSA's adverse conditions exception, codified at 49 CFR 395.1b Vol. 1, allows for exactly these situations. That regulation acknowledges, in the language of federal law, that professional drivers operating in severe weather conditions are sometimes required to exercise judgment over compliance. A driver who stops to assist a stranded family during a blizzard on the Dalton Highway is doing exactly what a professional should do. There is a version of this story that focuses on the storm itself, on Arctic pressure systems, on the meteorology of blizzard formation. That story is interesting, but it is not the story of what it is like to be the person inside that cab, responsible for the cargo, responsible for arriving, and also, because the road demands it, responsible for the people who did not plan as well as he did. The truck driver who saved that family was not extraordinary in the way that news stories sometimes make people extraordinary, as isolated heroes doing things no one else could. He was extraordinary in the way that experienced professionals in genuinely dangerous environments sometimes are. He was extremely well prepared. He had built the knowledge and the habits and the gear list that the job required. And when the moment came that tested all of it, he was ready. Not because the moment was dramatic, because the preparation was real. That preparation happened in hundreds of runs that no one filmed, in hundreds of pre-departure checks that no one watched, in hundreds of CB conversations in the dark with other drivers sharing information about road conditions. That is where the story really lives, not in the rescue itself, in the years of ordinary days that made the rescue possible. The next time you see a truck moving through weather that has stopped everyone else, consider what it took to make that look ordinary. Consider the preparation behind the wheel. Consider what is in the cab. Consider that somewhere ahead or behind, there might be someone who needs exactly what that truck can provide. And consider that the driver already thought of that. Before he left, truck drivers navigate some of the most demanding environments that exist on Earth. Blizzards, Arctic darkness, mountain passes, extreme isolation, and wildfires. Because the next story we are going to tell is about what happens when the road itself is burning, when the smoke fills the corridor ahead, and when the drivers who run wildfire routes face a threat that no amount of cold weather preparation can ready you for. That story is coming, and it will change the way you think about every road between you and everything you need.